Hello, today our distance learning is the end of the Vietnam War. This unit, we've been looking at how we got into the Vietnam War, how we fought, who fought, how it changed America, and then at the end, after a lot of years, after Tet, it started to change support, and we've talked about the hippie movement, Kent State, My Lai. Today we take a look at the end of the war. How do you end a war? How do you get out? By 1972, I don't know that there are a lot of people who are uncertain how it was going to all end. We wanted out. And so we're trying to figure ways of getting out. And the North is still fighting, and we're trying to get them to the table so we can end this war. President Nixon is going to use heavier bombing campaigns to try to get their attention. But really, we don't have a lot of things to bargain with. They know we want to leave, and they know that in the end we're going to. But finally, by 1973, the United States, after all the losses, both Vietnamese and American, I think everyone's really tired and wants to end this. And so finally, the peace talks in Paris are going to bring the war to an end and bring our POWs, our prisoners of war, home. When we go to the peace table, it finally comes down to certain things. We're going to get a ceasefire throughout Vietnam. And what this does is allows the shooting to stop, supposedly, so we can get our soldiers out. Remember, we'd been Vietnamization, where we're trying to ramp up the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese fighting and ramp us down and withdraw troops. Well, the ceasefire kind of basically is a face-saving thing, where we can say, well, look, the war's ending and we're getting out, we're not cutting and running. But in effect, that's what we were doing. The North has to agree to release our prisoners of war. And our soldiers and not so much sailors, but our soldiers and Air Force people that were prisoners of war during the war, they went through hell. They served their country with honor, under the worst circumstances. The prison in Hanoi, we've talked about the Hanoi Hilton. And those guys, some of them were in prison for years. It was important to bring them home. And there's a famous clip of John Wayne greeting the POWs as they come back to America. And he's got a very famous line. I'd ride into the sunset with any of you. You're the real heroes. And if you look at the picture up above, look at the joy on that family's face to see him come back from war. Getting the prisoners back was a very important thing. But we're basically agreeing that there will be a reunification of Vietnam. And quietly, we're understanding that it's probably going not to go the way we want. But we want to get our troops out. We signed the ceasefire. We signed the deal. And we pull our troops out in 1974. Of course, that just means basically by 1975, the North Vietnamese are going to attack. Now, South Vietnam, who's been fighting bravely without support from the United States other than, supplies and weapons and some airstrikes, they're outnumbered. And by 1975, the North Vietnamese invade South Vietnam and South Vietnam falls. The pictures I remember seeing, if you look over here, the helicopter, that's on the U.S. Embassy, and they're trying to get people out of Vietnam. And look at the rush, because all those people that worked with us, that were our allies and our friends, know what happens when the end comes, and they're trying to get out. If you look at the picture, that's a helicopter that's landed on an aircraft carrier, and they're just pushing it over the side so the next helicopter can land. But I think the picture that kind of says it all, if you look at the lower one, you see all on the street, you see all the boots and the helmets. When the South Vietnamese soldiers realize that the end is near, they're going to take their uniforms and their boots and stuff off and try to disappear into the public. And if you see this road full of boots, what it means is the end is near. They can't fight anymore. And if you look at the picture right below this, the communist tank coming through the fence there in South Vietnam, in Saigon. Saigon falls to the communists. That's how the war ends. But what do we learn from the war? First off, remember, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution says that the President Johnson could take and whatever he needed to do to fight this military action, not a war. Well, what we do is we go ahead and pass the War Powers Act. War Powers Act basically is passed saying that the President of the United States cannot commit forces for more than 60 days or situations they'll start a war without the approval of Congress. Vietnam, we just slid into it. Korea was called a police action. It wasn't even a war. Well, if you ask the people that fought there, sure the heck was a war. But so the War Powers Act is really important because it says you can't just have open-ended wars without approval of Congress. And so the War Powers Act is going to put limits on the presidents. Even with that, it's not the last war we fought. Desert Storm, our men fought bravely in the Middle East. Our Operation Iraqi Freedom, the invasion of Iraq and the kicking of Saddam Hussein out, was it Enduring Freedom? And then you have Afghanistan, where we're still have forces there, and we're trying to finally pull out of that war. So we're still in wars, and unfortunately, wars, as we've learned, can be a long time thing. And it's hard to get out of a war. It's easy to get in. It's very hard to get out. So you got to be careful what you're fighting for. We're starting to ask our leaders after Vietnam, what is your plan? What is the objective of this war? And when is it over? Another important lesson from Vietnam is the 26th Amendment. It just wasn't fair to ask 18-year-olds who couldn't vote to go fight in a war they couldn't vote about. And so if you're going to tell an 18-year-old that you're an adult, you need to give them the right to vote. And the 26th Amendment has done that and lowered that voting age to give a voice to more people. Remember yesterday we talked about the whole hippie movement, people that had a voice but not necessarily a vote. And this changes that a little bit. But the last thing about Vietnam I really want you to think about is the cost. If you go to Washington, D.C., you'll see a memorial that is like nothing else. It's a cut in the earth. And on the walls of this cut are the names of every American who passed in that war. And each one of those names is, a father, a husband, a son. And it's important that we remember they all fought. It's important that Vietnam vets get the respect for serving their country. A good friend of mine who was a Marine told me that when he came back, someone spit on him, and that was his welcome back to America. And he just didn't understand it. It took him the hardest time, he said, to adjust, because he just didn't understand his welcome. It's not going to be for years until a lot of water's under the bridge that America starts looking back and realizing that a lot of the Vietnam vets were not given what they were due. They served their country. If you look at the picture there of the two men standing over the casualty, I don't know that you ever let go, even though the war is so long ago. War has a hold on people still. And we should never forget that war is not always about glory and all these dramatic movies we watch. There's a price tag for those that fight. And those that die pay the ultimate price. But those that wound or those who are there also pay a price. So as we look at the Vietnam War, hopefully we remember all that. And hopefully you understand a little bit of how we got into the war, why we fought it, and the effect it had on America. Because the Vietnam War has had an effect on the American psyche. It really has. And so as we close this lesson up, a salute to those people that served, to the people that I know that served too. And that's our lesson on the Vietnam War and how we got out of it.